Sup, pups? Welcome to another episode of the Power Up Podcast, a podcast that is dedicated to hanging out with people and connecting with them, whether it be with, for me specifically, like video games, anime, and what have you, but also a podcast that does not shy away with talking about the spiritual warfare that is happening all around us and how we need to be vigilant and take care and stay with the scripture, be with the Lord, and but who says we can't have fun while we can, when we can? And with us today again, man, I'm on a roll of being able to schedule this man, but Gary Wayne has returned once again to another episode of the Power Up Podcast, and I'm always blessed to have him on. Gary, thank you very much for swinging by again.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure to do some business with you, so to speak, in terms of doing your show. And
Oh, absolutely.
always like to reach a new audience and to expand their horizons and raise their eyebrows at the same time, and maybe put a little bit of cognizant dissonance into their mind, which you and I were talking about a little bit for the show. That happened with me with a book I read when I was young, and kind of changed my whole path.
Yep, and the book he is referring to is The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. Right here, I actually just got finished reading it not too long ago, and of course, people would say, "Well, Greg, why haven't you finished Gary's book yet?" And I would say, "Have you seen how thick that sucker is?"
Yes,
And because one,
you can't speed read it.
Exactly, and that's
I was thinking maybe I should have put a warning label on it that if you try and read it too fast, where there's so much information on it, might pop some brain cells. So only read it as you can digest it, and then move on, because it's written in a way where you can do that. So
yeah, exactly. And I think we talked about it in like one of the, like maybe even the first episode or the past episode. It's like it's so well written that like each chapter in itself is something where you can just, like you said, slow down, read it, unpack it, and if you need to read it again, read it again, because there's just so much.
Or go back and read another chapter where it's talking about things where you might want to just get brushed up with it. So, writing a book that size, you want to be careful you're not too redundant, but because there's so much information and you just can't remember it all. You have to do a little bit, and also make it so that you could have people go back and find that information if they needed to read it without having a digital version. So that's kind of what I was trying to do.
Yeah, I've got both a physical copy and the Kindle copy. Each have their benefits.
Yeah.
Each are available and should be in the description below if you want to go and get Gary's book. And of course, on his website, Genesis6conspiracy.com, correct? I believe.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. And on the website, you can get a signed copy from me, or you can link over to barnesandnoble.com or amazon.ca or amazon.com. And I put those links on it because I live in Canada, so the shipping costs are almost as much as I sell the book for into the US. So it's going to be a little bit more money. So if people can't afford the signed copy, I give you a link where the shipping is like $7 or something in the US, where I'm going to pay $25 to $30 depending on where people live. So
Yep. So we've got it right here. Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Everything, like I said, all of Gary's contact information should be in the description. Hopefully one day he'll be on Twitter. But
I do have a Twitter account. I just stopped using it. I haven't shut it down. So
I think I followed it, and I do tag you in it. But you're not missing much, man. You're not you're dodging. One could say you're dodging a lot of bullets, just not being on that place. But I have
to reevaluate social media, because it's one thing to be able to ride on all the shows and everything that I've done, but with what happened with social media, I weaned it back just to what I have to have, which I weaned it down to straight Facebook. And so with the new book coming out, and I do like to have more contact, but I've just been so overwhelmed with getting this book out in 2 years, which is basically how long it's taken me to put it together. And it probably won't be out, talking to the to the publisher here, probably before the fall now, just getting it through the queue. And the
Mm.
editing process, as I said, is going to take us a little bit longer because, again, they need to get the right person, just as they did with the first book. Because if they don't understand the topic or they've never done such a big book,
Yeah.
it's so it has to be the right type of editor. So lots of things that sort of go into the publishing side. So I'm going to reevaluate as soon as I get it off of my plate and onto their plate completely and start going on more social media. I think I'll try Twitter again. I'm just not familiar with all the other options, and I was hoping there'd be a little bit more settling out as to some good other good platforms, but it's not real clear to me yet whether or not
Hmm.
there's decent enough of an audience size on some of the other platforms. So
I can definitely say, if it's anything of my, if you take of my opinion, I think Twitter is definitely a very good platform to kind of recheck in again. I think you would definitely reach out to a lot of people. You said you already have Facebook. I think that's fine. Um, yeah, honestly, to what I see, those are like the two biggest ones I think that are still way up in the lead.
yeah.
That sort of stuff. We're having people saying absolutely love Gary Wayne. Excited to hear, says Jamie Alyssa. Brian Tucker says, hey, Gary. Hey, Greg. Howdy from Southern Illinois. Oh, man. I'm originally from Illinois, so hopefully it's not cold down there. Harvey says, Gary's back, baby. Absolutely. Absolutely. But we'll go ahead. And actually, since we're kind of in Easter week, I just want to take a quick little prayer and just
Sure.
thank the Lord
Of course.
for being blessed to have Gary on the show, and of course for obviously giving us the ultimate gift of having his son die for us, so that we can be reconnected with him in paradise. So just a quick prayer. Lord, thank you for having Gary on the show. Let us just open up the hearts and minds of everything around us, and let it just be true to your word. Thank you very much, Lord, for sending your son to die for us, to give us the greatest gift that humanity could ever ask for. Your son, whose blood that spilled gave us a way to be reconnected with you and to be with you into paradise. And we just pray and hope that anyone who hasn't come to see you yet, Lord, can just reach out and find that push to have them check the scriptures and to hear of Jesus and to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior, to just continue growing that eternal family that we wish all of humanity would take. But of course, you are sovereign enough to give us the free choice, Lord. But we always hope that the choice is to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. So let us have a good talk. Let us be with open minds. And of course, in the end, also just remember Acts 17:11, that ultimately in the end, we check the scriptures to see what your son has to say and what you had to say as you spoke through the prophets and many people to contact, to share what you wanted to tell their creation. And thank you for being an ever-loving and very patient God. So in your name we pray, amen.
Amen. I always thought that everything that Jesus said and did while he was
Mm-hmm.
flesh with us has meaning, just as everything in the Bible has meaning. And you get that really sort of odd parable called, a lot of people refer to as Abraham's bosom.
Mm.
And a lot of people will take a parable and try and make it actual doctrine, as opposed to what's the moral of the story, which you shouldn't do, because we know we sleep unless we're Nephilim or Rephaim.
Yeah.
And to me, the parable is it doesn't matter how many people would come back from the dead. People still wouldn't believe them. There'd be so
Mm-hmm.
many, some might, but not a lot. And lo and behold, in that same, not that many years thereafter, he tells the parable, and probably very shortly after, he comes back from the dead, and
Mm-hmm.
most of his own people don't believe him.
What's really interesting, I was listening to someone else as well, and they he was talking about Lazarus, of when he decided to
Yeah.
raise Lazarus, because Lazarus was also dead
Yes.
for I believe 3 days, and he
Yes.
came
Yes.
after the fourth
Sure.
day. And a guy made a very interesting he told of something very interesting, that a lot of the Jewish people, the culture, is that they believed that the spirit would still stay with the body a little bit and
Hmm.
hover around it to hear all the mourning from the people for 3 days, and then
Yeah.
that's when the spirit would left.
Yeah.
And he said, very interesting on how Jesus waited till the fourth day
Yeah.
to make sure that he was dead, to come
Yes.
back and to
Yep.
raise him from the dead.
Yeah.
And I was like,
From the sleep,
oh,
as he would call it too, which is why
mm-hmm,
we know one of the reasons why we know we sleep. And the thing is Lazarus still alive? I mean, we don't hear about him really after the Bible, and some people speculate that he might be the disciple that Jesus loved, because he says he loved Jesus, and Jesus was
that's a,
absolutely shaken at the news, right, of his death,
yeah, that's a,
because he loved him so much and said so. And what's interesting about, I don't think it is, but I think it's a good story that people say,
yeah,
hey, that might be another possibility, because if you're given that sort of power to come back from the dead,
mm-hmm.
is that like an everlasting body that sort of change that could go to heaven or not?
I thought,
And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to finish at the end of the book of John, when it's talking about the disciple Jesus loved, and the disciples and apostles are all sort of arguing as to why he's getting such favoritism and this and that. And Jesus said, what is it to you if I want him to tarry or live until I return? So one of the two, whether it's Lazarus or the disciple Jesus loved, is probably going to be somebody witnessing in the end time. And
Mm.
either would make a good case. Some people think it's John's. I mean, I've got some speculation on it that I talk about it in the book, as well as being one of
Oh,
the two
interesting.
witnesses.
I'd like to. This is the first time I've heard that, so I'll
Yeah.
definitely can't wait
So
to cross that. So, do you think Lazarus and the rich man that Jesus told is a parable or an actual story? Because I personally think it's a story, because he actually specifically names Lazarus, and
mhm.
every other parable he tells is just a man or a woman.
It could be either, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, whether it's all on specific people that actually lived or not, it's the message he's
Hmm.
uh, communicating in the parable, and done in a way that non-believers and or the hardened Pharisees and Sadducees and Essenes may not be able to understand it, because they're blocking their own insights onto
Hmm.
it. So with a parable, you always have to focus on, for me, you always have to focus on the meaning of the parable, which he provides every
Yep.
time. So again, I caution people to especially with Abraham's bosom, to think that there's a place like perdition or something like that, or or especially in the Catholic religion, where they think there's a place where you go that
Mm.
purgatory is what they call. I'm sorry, not
Yeah.
perdition. And we don't get that biblically. So, yeah,
Hmm.
just you know what? There's great information in the details of the parables, because it would provide you additional
Hmm.
information of maybe what Sheol actually looks like. Um,
Yeah,
but
that was kind of the thing I thought of too. Because to me,
yeah,
it's like if he's going to specifically name someone too, that to
yeah,
me it enhances
yeah,
the seriousness of the parable of what he's telling about. Because it's like
yes,
this is a specific person, and the rich man never once complained
yes,
that it was unjust for him to be there. He felt
yeah,
everything. He was thirsty. He wanted water. He could see. He could touch, and he didn't complain that he was there because he knew that.
yeah. So yeah, it just depends on which Lazarus is being referred to. But
Yep.
again, the parable was always designed to resonate with the people that were listening to it at the time, and people of the nation, if they wanted to learn about it. So it wasn't going to be in a way that that's just a fairy tale name. It was there to try and get people to open their eyes,
Hmm.
but you can't force them to. So
Exactly.
people have to want to understand it.
Hmm. And I mean, what a power to be able to raise the dead. And that's actually a kind of what I kind of wanted to talk about today. It's kind of an umbrella sort of discussion. And of course, this show, I just enjoy seeing where the conversations goes, and that's why for the title of this show, it's the powers of spiritual beings. And I just wanted to hear from the amount of research that you've looked into and the searching of the scriptures and the culture, Gary. Just interested to hear about. We've heard of discussions of kind of what Nephilims looked like, what the angels, the appearances of angels, aliens, and you talk about fairies and all that stuff. And I'm interested in to kind of hear of the more not so much physical features as much as what powers that these beings can or have or can possess and do, sort of thing. Because as we were talking about earlier, we some people kind of downplay the seriousness of like how powerful these beings are too. Where we were talking about the Antichrist. The Antichrist is bestowed upon all the power that Satan floods inside of him to be able to call down fire from heaven, exactly like what happened with Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and all that stuff as well. And you were describing it on my friend Eric's shows last time, the features of like snake eyes and glowing sort of stuff too. So I guess we'll just go ahead and kind of get started with. Did like stories or research that you found when it came to the different tribes of I guess we'll start with like the fallen angels and stuff, based on hieroglyphics and stuff like that. What were the features that these creatures have, and what was it that made them so powerful and unique to where people would want to worship these sort of beings? Because just features alone won't do it. If you can like pick up a giant boulder that's twice your size
Yeah.
because you're just super enhanced with spiritual powers, that's another thing too.
Right. So, yeah, it's not only, what they could physically do, it was also the knowledge that they had
Hmm.
and the technology they could create. So you have sort of a trifecta of things. So, first thing for people to sort of get their heads around this is that you have to understand that they have had the ability to create a physical presence of their choice on the
Hmm.
earth. And so I think in most times they would take a presence that would reflect their angel presence as a spirit being, but obviously as a spirit being there would be some sort of form or vision or holographic type image of who and what they would look like, because we get descriptions of angels in the Bible, right? So seraphim
Hmm.
are serpent-faced angels with 6 wings. So there's that opalescence aspect, but it's and in that spirit sense, but there's a form that that spirit energy takes. And you have like the cherubim that have 4 faces. They have a face of an ox or a bull. They have a face of an eagle. They have a face of a lion and a face of a human being. And an Ophanim would have 3 faces of one of those 4, which we're not told which they are. But he also has a face of a cherubim, whichever one was depicted from that of a cherubim that
Jeez.
an Ophanim was. And if people aren't familiar with what an Ophanim is, that word comes up in the book of Enoch as one of the 4 groups of watchers. We
Mm.
get that biblically, but we don't get it presented to us as Ophanim because our churches aren't really helpful to us in terms of understanding the original Hebrew and the original Greek to sort out the angelic realm. So in
Mm.
Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, we get the throne of God image that Ezekiel has in the vision. And we have the cherubim, which is fine, but then you have these wheels within wheels, and the
Mm.
wheel aspect, when it says specifically wheel, it goes back to the Hebrew word gilgal for wheel, as in a wheel on a chariot. Or I really like this comparison as an example is Gilgal Rephaim, which is wheel of the giants at the foot of Mount Hermon. It's an old worship site
Oh boy.
of the Rephaim and Canaanites. And there's this being that is within the wheels.
Mm.
And that goes back to the word Ophan, which means wheel as well. And we understand it as it's translated into the book of Enoch as Ophanim, which is the male plural. So these are the wheel angels, just as the seraphim are the serpent ones, right? Uh,
Oh
and
man.
so on and so forth. So, yeah, so those are the angels that we kind of get descriptions of. Archangels seem to have a face of a human as well. But then there are other orders that we're not really told about what they
Mm.
might look like. They have descriptions of them in other um, religions like Gnosticism. So, but we have like, again, I'll use some of the Greek words that they come up in the New Testament as opposed to what they may necessarily come as, because the translators takes the same word and they might translate it two or three different ways, and then they might confuse two. Like for powers, for example, they
Mm-hmm.
conflate that one and it's talking in about two different kinds of angels when it's mentioning a power. They just decided to translate it that way. Maybe they didn't understand, or maybe it was designed to confuse people. I'll let
Mm-hmm.
people make their own decision on that. But
Yeah.
so, like, you have the dunamis, and you have the Icaros, and you have the exousia, and you have the arches and the archons, and you have all of these different types of angels. I won't go through them all, but they have their own rebellious order, this own hierarchy, their own army, but we're not really given the descriptions of these other ones. And so they'll show up for people that I'm referring to some of these words as the mighties, or as the powers, or there's principalities, the rulers, the lordships, and they all go back to, it's consistent in Greek, it's just not consistent in English.
Yeah.
So, yeah, until I could not crack how it might look until I got to the original language, and
Mm.
from that you can you kind of establish the a proper order and hierarchy based on the names that were provided. But we're not told on how they look. But there's an interesting outside book. It's called the Pistis Sophia. I'm sorry, and so they've got these archons from before the flood, and they're kind of in two different groups. One are multi-headed,
Oh
similar
jeez.
to a cherubim, and some are single-headed. They kind of repeat a little bit, and they give their names and everything. Like, for example, it's got in the third dungeon of the abyss, you have Arkarok. I'm reading this because I can remember a lot, but this gets down to a level of detail I'm not all that good with. And at a dog's face. And you have a ruler in the fourth dungeon with a serpent's face, and his name is, Akrakar. You've got a cat face. You've got a crocodile face. Um, you've got a basilisk's face, whatever that is. And then you have all these similar ones. You have a wild boar's face. You have a bear's face. They have all of these different kinds of faces. And then you have the multi-headed ones that have basically seven heads, like some depictions in polytheism of hydras, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and just as Leviathan has multiple heads, as it's described in the Bible. So,
So was the
kind of along. Go ahead.
Leviathan like its own thing? Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, you're interrupting. That you can look at two different schools of thought, that it is two types of sort of ancient beasts, or
Mm-hmm.
was two types of ancient beasts for a specific reason, or maybe it was part of the hierarchy. Some people believe that Leviathan is talking actually about Satan.
Mm.
And in the book of Isaiah, it talks about the Leviathan, the male Leviathan, will be killed in the end time.
Mm.
Satan is dealt with in the end time, and he's a serpentine individual.
Hmm.
And when you look at polytheism, they always had a counter uh, female god with the male god. So, let's say in the Sumerian pantheon, you have Tiamat, which is a serpentine god that is Leviathan like, but a female. And in the Bible, the female is slain, right? And the male isn't, so that the
Mm.
world isn't consumed by them. And in all the polytheist traditions, and there's many names for Tiamat. It can be Lotan, it can be Yam, Verita, and Indra. It's in all cultures all around the world. A god that is sort of usurping God's position. So Baal or Marduk, Indra, gods like that slay this female dragon
Hmm.
because it's a god. It's one of the gods, and it's causing rebellion against the pantheon of the gods. So a god in the Bible destroys the multi-headed Leviathan, the female. So you get that sort of maybe consistency that may have been Satan's partner
Hmm.
in that dualistic pantheon that polytheists have, that he would sit in the original time maybe at the head of the council of the gods with his female goddess.
Hmm.
So I look at that and I say, I can't say for certain that Leviathan is necessarily referring to Satan, but boy, you can make a pretty good case for it.
Yeah, cause the big thing you hear about the Leviathan is in Job, cause
Yeah,
God goes through the like I believe in Job a whole chapter is dedicated to
yeah.
the Leviathan too. And is the Leviathan since it seems like you described how it was kind of like almost a dragon sort of thing. That one was for like water and stuff, right? Because the
Yes,
behemoth is the land one.
land one. Yes, yeah.
Okay. Huh,
And
that's
the
very
female
interesting.
behemoth is killed as well. Maybe even the land one. I
Mm-hmm.
have to double check that. But we don't get other sort of references to it, right? But
Well,
it's that Leviathan in the end time that now is
mhm,
that now could that also be an prophetic allegory for the serpentine um, dragon empires, the beast empires, because you
mm,
have the conglomeration of the seven beast empires forming in the end time that's going to make the way for Antichrist to rise amongst them. And it has seven heads, right? It comes from the sea. It's it's called the dragon. It's called the red dragon in Revelation 12, and in Revelation 13 it's just a dragon. So you could make an argument that it might be that as well, or it might be both. It could be just sort of covering that all off in a sort of a summary allegory.
hmm. So do you think that do you think the Leviathans and behemoths are kind of still around to this day? Because you hear about like Australia, like so much of that is just evergreens and all that stuff
Yeah,
in there, and you hear not just there but at other places as
yeah,
well of natives saying, "Oh yeah, we've seen like for intensive
yeah,
purposes dinosaurs, which are like
yeah.
they've seen dragon type looking beast and stuff." You think that's going to
Well,
be more prominent, like
it-
appearing?
yeah, I don't think so. But
Hmm.
well, I mean, we're going to have wild beasts go wild, as Revelation
Yeah.
6 tells us about. But the only one that we can say for certain, without getting into speculation, is that
Hmm.
Leviathan is reserved for a death in the end time. So if there is one, and if it is swimming in the sea, or it's just an allegory for Satan, I mean that will be dealt with. So, but
Hmm.
the thing that we also have to be aware of is you could have had people working with fallen angels not in the abyss or with demons to
Hmm.
recreate, as in the movies of Jurassic Park about recreation of these things, and maybe they've already been experimenting and some of them are already, I mean, we don't know. But
Hmm.
what we do know is the entertainment industry is designed to tell us what they're doing and what they will be doing.
Yeah, yeah, they're getting pretty bold about that one too.
Yeah.
So like since you mentioned demons, I guess we can kind of tie into the whole aspect of still going off of the original fallen angels, because fallen angels can, as we see in the Bible, and just going off of like we'll just say the good angels, like the ones who appear
Hmm.
before Abram, and they could physically appear or manifest a physical body of some kind and eat and be touched and stuff, since they led Lot out before the destruction. But demons obviously want to inhabit something, so they can't inhabit per se or manifest a body of some kind. They have to actually go
Yeah.
into something,
Yeah.
into
That's
it.
that's why it's important to distinguish the gods between the demigods. And everybody's
Hmm.
familiar with that to separations. Nobody says, well, why is there a separation? And demigod is the ancient understanding that that is a lower level of God that's created specifically from a fallen angel
Mhm.
or a god and a human female. So it's from the physical world, it has godlike characteristics, and at one time they were completely immortal in those bodies until Jesus, until God took that away in Genesis 6:3 and limited all life to 120 years in the physical body.
Mhm.
Um, so when we look at the power that the angels have, it's significant more by sort of inference to what the giants would have, and that not all of those traits would have been passed on to the giants, but some were. So they
Mhm.
would have had some degree of additional, what we would call superpowers in the modern language,
Mhm.
superpowers of heroes, just as heroes were called um, a name for giants in Greek history and in Sumerian history. So when you have the story of Gilgamesh and the kings of Uruk, that's a story of the heroes of Uruk. There's separate literature on that as to the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's talking about them as heroes. And so it was an understanding that those were giants, offspring of the gods and human females. So Gilgamesh was the offspring of his father, Lugabanda, king of Uruk, and the fertility goddess named Nin, and in some translations, Ninsin. So definitely a Nephilim, Rephaim type of character. And he had great power. He could even take on the gods to the certain degree. You have written in the book of giants of Enoch, the one with just the fragments, the book of the giants, that Gilgamesh before the flood, there's two different Gilgameshes, one after and one before. Just as that's not unusual. Hercules is the same way.
Yeah.
And we know that because I just told you who made produce Gilgamesh after the flood. He's sixth generation after the flood, and yet we've got a giant that's talked about before the flood. And just as you have Zeus being the father of Hercules with alchemy, as opposed to Hercules, who is either a god or a giant, and likely both before the flood. And they usually conflate the two because people don't separate parent gods from offspring gods, and understand when they reigned. One's before the flood, the offspring gods like Baal, Anki, Osiris, Zeus, they're ruling after the flood. So you have to understand prehistory, you kind of have to keep that sort of straight. So these demigods had powers. They had the ability to self-heal, for example.
Mm.
And how I get there is through the post-diluvium giants, the um, Rephaim, that you have several different words that go back to the Hebrew word Rapha, starting with 7495, 7496, 7497. And then there's a couple of names of people named Rapha that they separate those into different people after those three. And 7497 is the one that is the translation for giant 25 times in the Bible. It's only translated twice as Rephaim, in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, and in Genesis 15 when God is promising Abraham the land from the Nile to the Euphrates River. That includes not only the mighty seven, which of course the Rephaim are included there, but there's a mighty 10, which I call the ancient KKK, the Cadmonim, the Kenazim, and the Kenim. So different rabbit hole, but so 7496 reflects them as their disembodied spirit, or Rapha, or Rephaim as a disembodied spirit. And that's like an evil spirit or a demonic spirit or a shade. It is also, so
Mm.
it's what happens to the giants after they die. And 7495 is the root word, which means to heal. And it's thought that they could heal themselves. You cut off their arm, they could grow an arm back. And the only way you could kill them
Just
was to take the head, to do it suddenly, just as Goliath did.
I was going to say
Or
that's
just as what happened to Goliath. Yeah. And several other times throughout the Bible, and I list them because they were hard to kill. They were ultimate warriors. And so they either did that through natural self-healing, like some animals in nature have that ability, like, or a talent or a gene or something that's passed on through the physical body and the DNA of their godfathers, that they could self-heal and regenerate and keep that body immortal until that was taken away. Or they had a technology that could repair themselves, as in a sarcophagi, as or sarcophagus, as a lot of people speculate. What's interesting is you have the Ugaritic text, which is post-Diluvian, and it's talking about Baal and the Baalim of Mount Hermon and the different tribes of the assembly of giants, the assembly of Datanu, which is the Ugaritic word for the Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of Danu. And you have the Rapium and the Rapiu, which is the root word for Hebrew Raphaim. And all would go back to the vowelless original of RPM, whether it's ancient Hebrew or ancient Semitic. And they're not only known as the dynastic warrior kings, which we understand warrior, the giants like Rapha, just as Goliath was a Raphaim. It was a giant, Rapha, just as his four brothers were, maybe five, depending on how you want to interpret that. And you have them also listed as travelers, just as we get the travelers in Ezekiel 39, the mighty ones at the time of the end time Gog war, which goes back to the Hebrew word abar, which means to cross over. And as it's used in the book of Job and other passages, and Dr. Heiser used to talk about this, as I recall, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, abar can be used in 1,000 different ways, but when it's grouped with death, it's usually meaning to pass over. And these are the travelers that are showing up in Ezekiel 39. And what's interesting about that is with the Ugaritic text, these travelers, they had the ability, when a giant king died, to do the death ritual and to lead a ritual parade into the underworld, so that they made it there safely. And or at times they could enter into the underworld and through the portal, and into where the gods were living in their belief system. And so they had the power to do that as well. And so they were like these travelers. So they're giant kings or travelers. And it says in the Ugaritic text that they had the ability to heal themselves and to heal others. So when you get this Fisher King concept that sort of passes down over the Merovingian shepherd kings and things like that, these are demigod, as they're entitling themselves with the divine right to rule, who had special powers, including healing. That's the tradition that is being represented in that sort of imagery. So they had the power to do that. So the other question is what else could they do?
Yeah. Because the Antichrist we were talking about earlier, the Antichrist, one of the big things that I'm sure is going to stun the world is the Bible goes out of its way to say that he suffers from a head wound that is literally will kill him, but yet he comes back,
Yeah.
sort of thing. So, and that regeneration definitely makes sense in the sense of being able to heal oneself and to heal one another.
Yeah. And what's interesting, it doesn't say he's beheaded. It's just a mortal head
Yeah.
wound. What should be a mortal head wound. If it had said beheaded, now that would be at a whole different level of what hasn't been able to be done in the past, right?
Yeah, that would be insane. That would not be good.
So they had, as you understand, the Zamzuzim, and the Zuzim would be related, and they're talked about in Deuteronomy 2, with the Zuzim being a branch of them in the War of Giants in Genesis 14. They had the ability to read land and to do things with land. They had a special knack for that, this tribe. And that goes to the geomancy aspect that they had. So they had knowledge and maybe something as more of a sixth sense. And geomancy is also at the root of how you go through portals in terms of understanding the matrix of how everything is made and
Mm.
being able to tap into that. So that's kind of part of the meaning as well. And I think some translations or some definitions call them mumblers, as necromancers were mumblers and
Mm.
mediums were mumblers. So they had the ability to communicate across dimensions, and with the fallen angels and maybe even other um, lost, um, already dead giants. And of course, biblically, we know that that's true. It tells us about them. But we also get an example in Ezekiel 32, where Pharaoh, who is a beast king of the first beast empire of Egypt, is talking to the terrible ones. And the terrible ones is Erit, or the Retim, as you get the ones, terrible ones. Erit is the singular. And they had fertility issues. And these are the Rephaim after the flood, is one of their titles. And so they had to reproduce with humans because they had, for sure, their women were largely infertile. And so to make sure their species didn't disappear, they would have to intermarry with humans ongoing, which is why you dilute those physical attributes as what they might have looked like, that was passed on, and dilute the powers of whatever was provided to them by their godfathers. So um, you have these terrible ones that are talking to Pharaoh from the sides of the abyss that they've been locked into, and they were sent there because they did terrible things while they were on the earth. They're the worst of the Rephaim and the Nephilim. And one presumes that because death by beheading was the worst death that they could suffer in their belief system, just as that was described in the extirpation texts of Egypt as another example, that they did anything they could to die a different way than losing their head, because they didn't want to go directly to the abyss. It was the worst thing that could happen to them.
Is that why, like, huh, interesting. So like is there any explanation as to why specifically beheading is in fact like the good, like the best way to
It
kill these
is,
people? Does it like separate their power or something
yeah.
like
Well,
that?
it's
Or
it, it's so sudden
mm,
and destructive and quick that they don't have the
makes sense.
time to do that. It's just an
Ah,
overpowering wound.
so kind
Um,
of almost like when it makes me think of the verse where it says like, you know, Christ coming back, it can be as quick as like the glittering of an eye, like the glitters in the eye sort of thing, like so
yep,
quick that
yep,
you don't have time even
yep,
to react. Wow,
yes,
that's very interesting. Man, so we got regeneration,
yep.
we've got sharing of technology, um, uh, and there's also
So,
is there? Oh yeah, go ahead.
well, if you want to look at some other aspects, you get through the bloodlines. The priesthood of the polytheist religions would, make up the magi and the priests of Egypt. Well, we see in the Bible what the priests of Egypt could do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Moses countered it.
Yep.
Um, and so we understand from history and everything else what the Magi could do in Mesopotamia as well. They had significant extra power, but that power probably came through the development of the knowledge of the mystical religions and the technologies of old. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that aspect of it as well. And that also the heroes, like the gods, had powerful weapons as well, at least
Mm-hmm.
before the flood. For, at least before the flood, and a larger degree than in after the flood. So,
Mm.
like Thor's hammer, for example, right? Would be sort of that sort of classic example of there was a group of people that were created by the fallen angels both before and then likely again after the flood to make weapons and technologies for the gods and
Mm.
for the demigods. And so however advanced that would have been, and there would have been a separation because the gods would never want um,
Yeah.
the demigods to try and overthrow them. And even though you have that war of the giants against the gods, I mean, they would be fearful of that, so they wouldn't give them enough. What's also interesting in the Book of Giants is that Gilgamesh is so upset about the flood coming, he's going to go to war against the sons of God in heaven and try and storm into heaven. So if he can storm into heaven, he has to have some sort of
Yeah.
technology to be able to do that. Because biblically, the only time we're told about somebody that's going to be storming heaven is in Revelation 12 with the fallen angels and Antichrist in Daniel 10, 8:10.
Yeah.
So that's a special technology. And a lot of people think that Nimrod, who inherits this antediluvian knowledge, too big of a
Mm.
long story to go through all the detail of it. I might have covered it on the last show, anyways. Who knows? But he's not just building Babel for um, a temple or a
Mm-hmm.
burial place. It's thought that he was like with the pyramids, they were some sort of technology and could do certain things. So there's several different versions of the Tower of Babel around the world, from the Kusha Maya to uh, Eridu and the Sumerians, and in the Babylonian tradition of it, there's also Armenian versions. There's lots of different versions of this event. The Tower of Babel was, you might see it translated as Tower of Babel, but typically it's Tower of Babalu.
Mm.
ILU being the transliteration of EL for a god or an angel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's understood not as confusion of languages with Babel, but as the god as the second compounded word, and Bab, which was Akkadian for gateway or stargate. So it was like he was trying to create a portal in their version to actually physically get into heaven and
Mm.
war with God, or maybe to get into the abyss and to release
Ooh.
the fallen angels.
Mm.
Or both. It's probably both.
Now, when it comes to, I guess we'll go ahead and still keep with the whole portal idea. That's kind of you talked about it when you were first on the first show that you appeared on, like leprechauns and having, the whole legend of leprechauns is you don't see them, and that really it's because, like you were talking about, portals
Yeah.
of like rock formations that would
Hmm.
allow them to slip through dimensions and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Can fairies do that too, or is that a whole different sort
No,
of?
fairies can do that too.
Okay,
So
can you kind of tell us like a little bit, I guess, specifically about how like the little people and like
yeah.
fairies and whatnot?
Yes. So when we talk about the elementals, and we get the term elementals in the Bible in the New Testament,
Hmm.
and it's talking about the rulers of the earth, it also talks about it as the basic, uh, you know, product of the universe as well. But there's two different applications there. So this elementals is the lowest group of the rebellious hierarchy, so lower than the
Mm.
demigods. There's four different groups of elementals. I only talk about three of them in the book, but before I get to the three, I'll just remind people there's a fourth one. They're reptilians. They're larger than humans, not as big as giants, and they're called salamanders as the group of elementals, and typically thought to be the ones that people see underground and this and that. But
S-
anyways, that's getting
Salamanders
into
are
it.
more of like because I've heard of Eastern, like in Asia sort of stuff, like salamander people is
Yeah,
sort of thing. Okay,
yeah. They may
cool.
be actually perhaps recreated versions of the Nahash, the serpent, before Eden,
Uh,
that had legs, arms, could talk, was intelligent, see and
oh
be,
man, would
right?
not
Or
be
they could be
surprised.
something different, right? I mean, who knows, right? Um, so
Sorry.
it could be that, but they are reptilian, just as there's reptilians in the alien sort of nomenclature of types of peoples
Hmm.
in their mythos. So the other three groups, you have three groups of little people. There's one that gets mixed in with them. I might touch on them at the end just to make a clarification. But
Hmm.
the three groups are good looking ones, mischievous ones, and ugly
Mm.
ones.
Mm.
So in these groups, you have good looking ones, let's say like a Tinkerbell type of fairy, right? Um, you have mischievous ones like leprechauns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pixies, and there's all sorts of other ones. And you could do a whole show just on the fairies. So it's that many types and things
Oh.
like that.
Okay.
There are all, and I talked about the ugly ones, and they're all recorded in polytheist history, religions, mythology as being created by the gods through sexual
Mm.
behavior. Although some people speculate they were probably might have been created um, from DNA manipulation or something like that. So, but
Mm-hmm.
as it comes down, they're another sexual created product of angels. And so they would have additional powers as well, just sort of based on that. But they were at the lowest level, so they would receive the lowest level, and they weren't as large. So there's you can see sort of the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So the mischievous ones, they're and none of these are really friends of humankind, but they do horrible things to humankind. The mischievous ones, they play
Oh,
tricks. They're the
what did we?
trickster ones, right? But it's the ugly ones that really sort of highlight the fairy domain, the portals, and things like that. Not that these other ones don't come through and aren't associated with other interesting things like Bigfoot and Sasquatch, but
Yeah, I want.
within the ugly nature of the elementals, you have like the dwarves, and just as they're depicted in the Lord of the Rings, they lived in the earth and they made and manufactured weapons for the gods and the demigods. And so each one of these little people had a specific role in their creation. And so you've got other, ugly ones like trolls that are under a bridge or sometimes guard portals, as portals are sometimes under a bridge. You also have the gnomes, and the gnomes are a very interesting one because they tended, and it's kind of the root is rooted in Gnosticism and knowledge, right?
Mm.
As you take that back to its Greek etymology. And so the gnomes were responsible for the genealogies, the history, and the religion and the history, and were responsible for technology. So you have a group of the gnomes that are known as the Greys. And these
Mm.
Greys come through fairy portals, fairy domens, fairy shays, fairy mounds, all different words, fairy lakes, all known for locations of portals in their flying machines, like
Hmm.
spaceships. They kidnap people, do sexual experimentation on them, are looking to regenerate their DNA, and then return the people, and they have no memory of what happened except if they're under some sort of hypnosis or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of ritual state of trance. So I put a couple descriptions in my book about them, and they are
Excuse me.
identical in the way they look and what they do to the gray aliens. And of
Mm.
course, the gray aliens have great technology and power. So again,
Mm-hmm.
that's a reflection. And we also don't know what other additional powers that they have, but they also have all through fairy culture and mythos this ability to do magic, to be invisible, to disappear, to
Mm-hmm.
curse people, to hurt people, to do things to the land. They have additional powers.
That's what I was gonna get with. That was another thing that I funny and how it just tied it at the end because I was gonna ask you about aliens too. So and you're there already, especially with a lot of people who claim they're abducted. They have a they communicate by with telepath.
Well, yeah, they're recreating the hive mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a technology generated ability. So in the occult belief system, and particularly with the LB of the Elven bloodline, which is a fairy bloodline and a dragon bloodline,
Mm-hmm.
they believe in the hive mind. And the hive mind is something that they communicate telepathically, and it was inherited and allowed them to work together
Mm.
in like
So,
mind to do things that they would not be otherwise capable of doing, and more powerful if they were standing together with that one kind of mind and amassing that power to be used. And what's interesting about that, as you sort of take that back to the Bible, the word like mind is used. And what's really scary is it's used in the time of the end with the 10 kings in the book of Revelation,
Yeah.
who with one mind or one like mind hand their power over to
Oh,
Antichrist.
oh my gosh. Oh,
Now,
jeez.
what's also really interesting about that hive mind, and it's they believe in it that it is, comes from the whole hive system and the queen bee who, passes on from generation to generation and creates the hive and all of the nourishment thereof. That's like the mother goddess, the queen uh, Sophia, I would call it, just
Mm-hmm.
as philosophy comes from the love of Sophia, the love of wisdom. Um, and what's really interesting about all of that is that's kind of like in their idealistic world how they would set up a society that was all sort of telepathic, working as one
Mm.
mind, which is kind of what the mark of the beast is really kind of doing, right? Is
Yeah.
bringing that all together in a modern teraphim, a talking idol,
Mm-hmm.
which a teraphim shows up in the Bible. And I'll just finish it up here because I know
Yeah.
you really want to jump in. Um,
No, it's
is
all good.
that when the Israelites went into the covenant land and God said he would deliver them up for them, one of the main things that God did was send the hornets to deliver up the hive mind, be like, and be imagery of the Anjou and other occult um, coats of arms and things like that, because the hornet is the natural enemy of the bee. So it
Mm.
disorientated it, discomfited them in ways that they could not handle, and they would turn on themselves. They would be in complete panic. They didn't know how to do things when they weren't in that hive mind state, and it was just set it up for the Israelites to come along and take off their head and move on to the next one.
Makes me think of that meme. There's a meme out there that has like your honeybee, your bumblebee, and then the hornet.
Yeah,
And it's like I'm like, oh, I just collect all the pollen and and I'm
yeah.
doing my thing, and then the other one's like, oh, I just like being around flowers and I'm cute and fuzzy, and then it's
Yep.
like the hornet's is like jackass or something like that. Like he's just like sort of thing. Um Now that you're talking about the hive mind, there was
Yep.
something I'm curious about that. Then, do you think, and especially with demons, when demons like to inhabit, sort of thing, do you feel that uh, the concept of AI and technology kind of being used or trying to be used as like a vessel to contain these spirits to go in there? Do you think that that's something
Yeah.
based on what you explained, like could be a possibility
Yeah. So
of
I kind of think that it also reflects the levels of power. So when you
Mm,
have these idols that could speak that was wood and stone, I think that might be the fallen angels with a higher level of
mm,
power. Demons need an oiketerion. That's that dwelling place for the
mhm,
spirit. And typically we understand that as the soul and the body of something living. It could be a human or it could be an animal, just as we see Legion go into the pigs
yeah,
in the New Testament. Not that they want to stay there because it's obviously not a good oiketerion for them.
mhm,
But there's a lot of thought that if you expand on this talking teraphim idol, that the end time beast image is going to be, that could be populated by demons operating it,
mhm,
or it could be actually AI doing it, but it could be a
mm,
combination of both. And that the more we go into this technology of AI and quantum computing, the more the scientists, Elon Musk, other people are talking about that they're communicating with these beings. Some say it's Metatron. Some they have different names.
mhm,
So there's probably several. Metatron comes out of the third book of Enoch as being Enoch, son of Cain, who reached God level, angelic level through his knowledge. So
that's
again,
crazy.
this could be an allegory or
Mhm,
as to what they're talking about, but this is the same celestial white masters. It is the great white brotherhood. It is mostly demons. Yes, there could be some angels. I think that the technology is creating that oiketerion to house them.
Mm.
But it's not where most of them want to be, because it's still not that type
Yeah.
of body that they had. It's still not that type of interaction. So look for some sort of cloned individual, body, or transhuman clone body combination, and maybe some things that may even look like what's in Revelation 9 in that 200 million man war.
So does the Bible like kind of explain the reason why God like cursed like the shades and whatnot to walk forever, sort of thing? Is there ever an explanation about that? I'm trying to think, because
Yeah.
why would you why, I'm just curious as to why God would say specifically, you have these terrible ones that were so bad that you need to be locked away, but you guys, you just
Mhm.
can't, like, just be, enjoy the rest of your spiritual lives,
Right.
I guess you could say, cursing and walking around until Judgment Day comes. Then we're gonna toss you into the lake of fire.
Well, I think it goes to, again, the flood story, where we get these details when we have a deeper dive look at it.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, most people just settle for the violence of the earth, and that people were
Mm-hmm.
godless, and that somehow that rose to the level that required the flood, which is easy to sort of paint God as this horrible God, right? Which polytheists like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they enter these seeds into Christian faith to create wedges, and people don't have the ability to answer things properly. So yes, there was violence. The Nephilim were absolutely the most violent people. They slaughtered human en masse. They ate humans. They drank their blood. They did the same thing with the demigods, and they really like to kill each other because of the quickening aspect of adding power, is what they believe, to
Mm-hmm.
their spirits. So, but they did one other thing. They corrupted the whole earth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the Hebrew word shakath.
Shakath.
Now, that's just not being godless. This is not just being violent. This is a destroyer word. This is a spoiler word as it's defined. It means to decay, to ruin, to
Mm.
degrade. They changed everything and degraded everything on the earth. That included the plant genomes. That included the DNA of pretty much all of the animals. Between interbreeding and other DNA manipulation, probably most of the humans. It's probably why that God selected 8 who were not only pure of spirit,
Pure
but
blood.
pure of genes and blood and physical
Blemish,
character.
yeah.
Yeah, to start the world anew. It's why he called representatives of 1 pair for all the unclean animals and 7 pairs for all of the clean animals to restart, because he knew the ones that weren't DNA manipulated. So let's say in the unicorn mythos, where it's this really cute little horsey type of thing with a horn that's playing while people are loading on the ark, and somehow it misses it because they're so playful they didn't get to their appointment on time. No, 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 no. They weren't called because it was a chimera like animal coming out of Greek mythology, where they created all of these beasts through DNA manipulation somehow that had multiple types of animals on each sort of being. It was an abomination in itself. That's why it wasn't called. So that reflects the power of the technology and the knowledge that the giants had working with the fallen angels. So that's, again, another example of
Mm.
their extended power.
Wow, that is absolutely crazy. There was a comment back, and says, Gary, are you telling us that the little people are real, so us Irish people aren't crazy after all?
Well, we are crazy.
Aren't we all just a little crazy in
Yeah,
some weird
we
shit?
Irish are crazy, that's for sure. And we are pale, and we are green-eyed, and we are red-haired, and but that doesn't mean we're Nephilim. So,
Yeah.
or crazy. But yeah. So um, here's what I do know is I think it's part of the deception. I think they'll come out. They're going to be different
Hmm.
types of aliens to create that sort of delusion. I think we're getting close to that. But even if they're not, the only thing that's relevant in terms of why it's important for us to understand of this is that whether or not it's true or not, polytheists believe it.
Yeah.
And it's what they do with that belief that we have to understand. So it helps us to fend off their spiritual attacks. It helps us
Hmm.
fend off their mortal physical attacks, seeding doubt, corrupting things, and the tactics that they're likely to try and attack us on. Now, eventually, they're going to, look like in their own eyes they've got, the mundane humans,
Hmm.
on in the edge of the abyss, and to be wiped out, to be remembered no more. Except that they're being lied to by the fallen angels, because they already know, with Jesus being created and him going to talk to the worst of these impassioned angels in the abyss in First Peter 3, that the rebellion is over. It's just the details
Hmm.
and making sure all humans have an opportunity to keep their name in the in the book of life and not have it blotted out. So
Hmm.
there's a set time, there's an ordained time, and they have no control over that. So they'll have to accept the end time at the ordained time. But the reason why it's important is because they want to do that day of destiny already always have sooner than the ordained time, which is why nothing is new under the sun. They keep trying to get it to that point for that showdown with the God of the universe sooner, because they believe they can win. Well, the angels don't. They're just deceiving their people after the resurrection. That
Yeah.
and here's the thing: is what First Corinthians tells us is that if they had known about the resurrection, they wouldn't have ensured Christ was crucified.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they
They
didn't
made
know about that. They thought
a big error
they
on their
had
part.
humankind at the point where we would be remembered no more, just as the Amalekites and all the giant nations said, "We will wipe Israel from the face of the earth." It's the larger accursed oath that was taken on Mount Hermon by the fallen angels to create the Nephilim, to make sure humankind, the Adamites' name was remembered no more. Wipe from the face of the earth.
So, I think you kind of answered it a little bit, but so when it comes to like the inhabitations of the demons that are trying to find the dwelling place, it's interesting because in the Bible, anytime you see someone get possessed by a demon, they are enhanced in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
The
Strength. Yep, for sure.
we got strength. We had the little girl who could predict the future,
Yep.
or quote. I don't think she could really. Do you think she could have actually predicted the future, or is it just because they've been around forever? It's like I can pretty much tell you whatever you want to know, sort of thing.
They have some foreknowledge.
They do. Okay.
Yeah, and it's through the gods. They don't know everything,
Hmm.
but they kind of know directionally where things are going to go, and I'm sure they can calculate
Yeah.
accordingly. But the thing is we know it's not perfection because they're not always right.
Hmm.
In fact, most times they're not right, but
Yeah.
they do have the ability to project what they think might happen based on that knowledge.
So kind of going back to what I was kind of curious about too. Why is it that these demons always, and like I said, you might have answered it, but why is it always seeming that when they're inhabited by something, they're just not satisfied? So they're always like damaging the host and stuff. Is it kind of
Yeah.
like a two-way street to where this isn't the dwelling place that I want, and I want to go back to what originally was per se? And is it also kind of
Yep.
like a two-time thing to where it's like if it's a human, it's like I hate these people, I hate this creation as well. I'd rather just one more, body thrown away sort
Yeah.
of thing.
There might be some of that. The trouble is that there's already a spirit occupying that dwelling
Mm.
place. So it's not a symbiotic relationship. It's a war that's going on in that
Yeah.
body. So it's a physical spiritual war, and you see the repercussions of that war with how things sort of manifest on the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the demon spirit is ultimately a little stronger unless the human spirit is
Mm-hmm.
relying on Jesus and God
Mm-hmm.
to help fend it off. But typically, demons go into bodies of people who they know aren't saved and aren't
Yeah.
going to call on God, and they just don't, and they're probably in an absolute state of terror as to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the power of that demon allows them to suppress that down. Now, in the occult, they also have like shamans and adepts who will try and bring in a demon spirit. They're
Mm.
probably looking for an angelic spirit where it could be a little bit more symbiotic. I'll touch on that in a second. I don't know whether I have on your show or not. But they believe with the knowledge that they're taught in the mysteries and as high level adepts that they can do more of a symbiotic relationship with this demon, and that they're not going to fight it back, and in return the demon is going to provide them additional knowledge.
Mm.
I still think there's a suppression going on. And
Yeah. Why
so
would
we
they
see,
think that?
yeah,
Why?
so we see this in the imagery, um, like in the crazy clown spirit, like it's showing the spirit that's below, or in theater masks as the spirit below, or in the Day of the Dead where they have that white sort of look. And with the court gestures, which were polytheist magicians designed to be hidden within the court
Mm.
of the royal court so that they could be there, and they were to make them laugh, but they were high level adepts, so that they could have their polytheist priest with them all the time as an advisor. And they say if they didn't make them laugh, it's probably more like they didn't do the right things that they wanted them to do in terms of adding to the king's power, is they would take a knife and they would slit the mouth like this. And that's the same imagery you get with the Joker in Batman, who is a superhero that all superheroes are based on. And Batman is based on a branch of the Xibalba giants of the out of the Popol Vuh of the Quiché Maya, which were bird Nephilim. They had an
Bird
owl or a
Nephilim.
raven face. We can get into that too.
Yeah.
Different kinds of Nephilim. And the Xibalba one, they had sort of owl, but typically they're described as falcon, raven, or eagle faced. And there's one branch that's called the House of Camazots of the Xibalba. And that is translated as the House of Bat. And if you
How
Google
convenient.
Camazotz, Camzotz, you're going to get up an imagery of this Batman outfit. I kid
How
you not.
how was it spelled?
Cam A
Camk.
A Camazotz. House of Camazotz. If people want me to give them the reference in the Popol Vuh, I've got it on a document. I can send it to you. Just get a hold of me through my website.
Camazotz. Oh, well. Uh,
Is it coming up?
if I'm spelling it right, yeah. Oh,
C
yeah.
C Cama
See,
Zotz.
yeah, I got it. O Z. I know that's Z. Oh, you
Yeah, I'm
Canadians
Canadian. I
would.
can't help it.
Yep, you got your Batman cape right there,
Yeah.
and
Okay, that's
then
not what they usually show, but that's the more accurate depiction as opposed to the Batman outfit. So,
yeah, there's it
what was
had a
that picture? Well, just you went a little
this
bit
one.
right there. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there was there you go.
There it is. Yeah,
Wow. I saw that and I was like, it's cool looking. It's not. I think that's not what he's calling. But there you go.
yeah,
There you go, right there, folks. That's insane. Wow.
yeah. So, in Sumerian history and on reliefs, they show the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki has wings and these big stocky legs and these massive feet. And some of them are depicted with a human's head and look like Gilgamesh would look.
Hmm.
Others have an eagle head.
Hmm. Eagle.
on the reliefs. So if you go back to what we talked about earlier, was there a type of watcher that had a man's face and an eagle's face? A cherubim did.
Mm-hmm.
It also had a lion's head and a bull's head. So when they took a form in the physical world, they didn't generally show up with four faces. They would pick one head in a physical body. So now, if they produce as an eagle face or a bird face giant, then you would produce giants that look just like them. In this case, the Zilbaba and the Camazots. Now, in Southeast Asia, in China, in India, in Malaysia, and in Japan, you have these Tengu gods.
Mm.
They're similar and related to the dragon creator gods, but distinct. And these are Anunnaki looking like gods. And that, just as, let's say, Horus is a falcon headed god, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple other bird-faced gods in the Egyptian pantheon as well. Well, all of these and all of those countries and accounts I'm talking about produced Tengu offspring as warrior kings and as priests for their Eastern religions. And you can Google Tengu, Tengu, and you'll bring up, and I got a great document on these guys. And I have pictures of all of these on the Facebook publish one that I do, and they're just absolutely crazy looking, but it starts to bring that imagery to you. So if you do the Japanese one, if you're Googling that, the Japanese Tengu, it really sort of zeroes in on that look.
Let me see if I can do it justice here. Like that sort of thing, or are you talking like more over there?
Yeah, so that one right there, the one on the bottom that's second from the right, that would be the most accurate one in a actual statue. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the
Yep.
beak.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they're the ones who taught the martial arts
Mm.
to the Asian
Interesting.
people. Yeah. So now a cherubim also has a lion's face. Well, lo and behold, we have the lion men of Moab and
Yeah.
the lion-like men of Gad. And one of the kings of the four kings from Mesopotamia is Arioch, which means lion-like.
Huh. Coincidence?
And
Hmm.
they're associated with the word Gibberim as they show up. They might be called mighty ones, wilderness men. And you take that back to Hebrew, it's Gibber and Gibberim for the description of the Nephilim. And you also have ones before the flood, like the Urmalu that were in Sumerian mythology. For the lion ones, you get similar ones on Egyptian reliefs as well. So you got pictures of these ones. I have a great
Mm-hmm.
article on the lion men as well.
Is
And
that
what
on
else do
your
we have?
is that on your
With
website? The article?
no, so just get a hold of me. I'll send people the document. So
Okay, yeah. Once
the
again, all
website.
of oh, sorry. I was just plugging you. Once again, everything Gary's talking about, his all his contacts and stuff is in the description below.
Yes, it is. And if you go to the media page, where it says contact Gary Wayne for an author, that's my website email. It's genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. But if where it says contact Gary Wayne for an interview, click on that line that takes you through and just request the information by topic, because I have a lot of documents, and I'll send you the ones that you're looking for. If I don't have it, I'll tell you I don't have it. So, but I probably spend 2 or 3 hours a day just sending out documents and answering people's questions on email. So, you
Look at those.
also have another type of Nephilim type of creature in the dogmen.
Mm,
Oh, just before I get onto that, so
yeah.
because I like to get things back sort of biblically as best as I can, right? So
Mm,
there's a god in the Bible that's called Nergal. He's a very famous Mesopotamian war god,
mm-hmm.
and he is a lion-headed god. And we actually have him as one of the gods of the Avim which are one of the tribes of giants.
Oh my goodness gracious!
Yes.
Everything.
Now, you get in that account a god named Nibaz,
Nibaz. Hmm.
Nibaz. And that, when you take it back to Hebrew, is a barking god. And it was depicted as a wolf or a dog in an image and was known as the barking god. Now, you've got another god in the Egyptian pantheon named Anubis, who's
Mm-hmm.
a jackal god. And he created, oh, and this Nebaz was also one of the gods of the Avim that they were worshiping. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but Anubis created offspring in great numbers. And this goes in with the cynocephaly sort of mythos, the dogmen mythos. So, and it connects with the city that these dog Nephilim lived in, called Sinoopolis. I kid you not. And I have a great 3-part document on the dogmen. So these
Wow.
dogmen, they weren't small. So when Pliny the Elder is talking about them, for example, in History 6, 194 and 195, you have a 12-foot dog Nephilim.
Oh jeez.
Yes. And, so they're generally larger. They're usually not generally thought of as large as Nephilim or Rephaim were, but some accounts show that they actually were. Now, these dogmen are talked about by more than just one historian. And they're talked about in North Africa, they're talked about in India, they're talked about in Chinese history. So, in Hesiod's account, they're the offspring of Hemicernes as one of the gods, and Herodotus talks about the Marmatae or the Berbers in North Africa of Libya. You've got Pliny, who I've just talked about. So they were actually listed as 8 cubits tall in Pliny. And if you use, I don't think they're royal as in 21. I think these are typically dog Nephilim were mercenaries,
Mm.
right? Just as Caleb was a mercenary and his name goes back to dog in the Bible. Another interesting coincidence, but and I'm not saying he was a dog Nephilim. I'm just saying that's what the name means.
Huh.
But he was 8 cubits tall, which would make him 12 feet. But if you did it on a royal cubit, he'd be closer to 14 feet tall. So Cestius has them in India, and he wrote a book. Marco Polo wrote about the dogmen in his writings of traveling to in the time of the Khan dynasty, the Mongol dynasty, and there was actually a race of them that lived on an island as well as in the mountains of India, but an island off the coast of Japan as well. So, and you get these dog mythos imagery coming through the age of the church, right? So St. Christopher is associated as being a Canaanite in some accounts and a mercenary from North Africa where these dogmen come. Now, you don't get that in the Roman church that he's a dogman, but you move that over to the Eastern Orthodox that split in 1000 AD, and he's depicted as a dogman. And then
Wow.
in the Eastern Orthodox, um, there is a sort of a prayer or blessing that's done, and it's talking about the Jews and the Gentiles and the Indians and the barbarians and the Scythians and the Greeks, then the cruel savage, and then the fearsome dog-headed giants out of the Eastern Orthodox religion.
So
So
you just have all that, and then it's like, oh yeah, and the dog-headed giants. It's
yeah,
like,
then the dog-headed
no,
giants.
it's like, oh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
that's in prayer 93 of St. Gregory Nereg's Book of Lamentations to the Oriental Orthodox prayer thread.
So what were the giants then like over here in like the Western area with like the Native Americans and stuff like that? Because they would say they saw like the like these tall giants with like
Yeah,
6 fingers and stuff like that.
yeah,
Was
and
there
double rows of teeth. Yeah, they had
yeah,
red
but
hair.
Red hair. Okay.
elongated skulls, no sutures.
So were they
Um,
more human? Was like kind of like elementals and like more
no,
animal type,
no, they were taller than humans.
taller than
Um,
humans?
so these accounts come late. So
Mm,
um, when you look at giants before the flood, they have sort of similar descriptions as after the flood, just a different sort of size. But whether it's the Atlantean accounts,
mm,
the three common traits are the dark-haired, pale skin like
mhm,
Gilgamesh, which seem to be more likely have been to produce by cherubim with the human face as opposed to the lion face or the eagle face. And then you have the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and the red hair, hazel-eyed ones that also show up in the giant tribes in the land of Israel. So the Horim,
mm,
which are part of the Hivim and the Hurim, as part of the nomenclature of these giants, they had red hair, hazel eyes, pale skin, and the word hor goes back to pale bread, words like that, hori. And the Anakim, so the Horim also produced Horites as a hybrid breed. They
mhm.
also intermarried with the Edomites. And so you had Timnah, a Horim, marrying Eliphaz to produce the Amalekites, which would have been a hybrid, right?
Mhm.
Um, Now, what they looked like, probably a mix of, dark hair and red hair, but you would think it would run through. But the Anakim were the blonde hair and
Okay.
pale skin and blue-eyed ones who they fathered the hybrid Amorites who are depicted in the same way, just smaller than the Anakim.
So, so kind of with the ones that like are more human looking, and then you have your more animal looking ones. Like, were they kind of just all over the place? Because it sounds like a lot of like the animal ones is more over on the eastern side of the world, while more
Yeah.
human ones are more on the western side of world.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of animal ones in the Western
Hmm.
culture. Um,
Yeah.
I think the human headed ones were by far the most dominant. You get pockets, no matter in any of the accounts, you get pockets of these other ones.
Okay.
So they may even had even more reproduction issues, like the Raphaim, for example, which would be more coming from a serpent type of look. But through that dilution, though, they lose that look. So Akhenaten, for example, over 1,000 years after the flood, if you Google him and show his picture, he's got that long protruding chin,
Hmm.
high cheekbones, large, thin lips, large wraparound eyes that glow because they were called the shining ones that would light up a room. This long, elongated oval skull without sutures, and they always will depict them females or males in most of the Egyptian um, images and statues with wearing a hat. If they're not wearing a hat, they got this really
Yeah. You meant
awful looking skull.
Yeah, you mentioned that on Eric's show. I remember the
Yeah.
wearing them hats
Yeah.
to hide that stuff.
But if you're this really goofy looking, bird one and you're more of a warrior class, and you can't bring in all of these harems that you want, um, you're probably less likely that humans want to interbreed with
Yeah.
you. I'm just sort of thinking. So might be one of the reasons why with that infertility issue that was even larger of a stumbling block, or humans just found them so awful to look at, they just
Hmm.
hunted them down, right?
Well, I was gonna say when you were talking back with like the ugly ones for like the elements and the fairy
Yeah.
type, it's like, well, no wonder they're always around portals and stuff. They must be so
Yeah.
ugly. They have to get out of there as quick as possible,
Yeah.
bouncing around and all that stuff. So I know on the first show, you went in a little bit detail
Yep.
about blood consumption, about how some of them wanted to take in that blood because it
Hmm.
gave them some sort of nourishment from the like life essence sort of thing. And I guess I'm kind of curious to tie that into with vampires. Like, what is the first of the vampire? Like, I guess sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, so you get a very strong tradition of ancient vampires like Lamias and
Hmm.
Liliths, and of course Lilith is a offspring of Tiamat,
Hmm.
whether a demigod or an offspring god. Um, and they're night operating witches, Upiers, Lamias, um, and out of that sort of imagery comes an amalgamation into what our modern understanding is of a vampire, largely based on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Hmm.
Dracula means son of a dragon.
Yep.
And the character was Vlad the Impaler, of the Sarkaniron, or the Order Draconis, as it's called. And so you have this tradition of Nephilim who drank blood uh, to enhance their life in terms of length, and to add additional sort of cognizance, additional mental um, abilities. That's was their belief, and they probably just like doing it too. But
Hmm.
that's a different story. But they did it for a reason. They, and sometimes they mixed it with things like beer. Sometimes it was menstrual blood. But I mean, they did a lot of, especially in the lunar. Sort of cycle of the rituals, they would bring in the star fires. That menstrual blood is generally known in the occult. And you also have this tradition of a quickening as well, where you get this life energy, just as with the Highlander series, where there can only be one, and this life force would go into the giant after they beheaded them. It's a sort of an allegory of that sort of life force. So as you move forward, this imagery of the vampire um, into Latin, and then into Romania, it's called sort of the Strigoi, which is all connected to these other words that I was talking about, like Lamia. Uh,
Hmm.
but as it starts to come together with um, Vlad the Impaler, you have this serpentine imagery, which gives you that imagery of the original Nephilim, or the original Rephaim, as the main kings and the queens, and as natural enemies of uh, Jewish people and Christians, so the God of the Bible, right? So you got this sort of allegory that's in there. You get the teeth of a cobra of the Egyptian dynasty that's in there for how they're going to bite and suck the blood out.
Hmm.
You get this, we're going to drink blood for immortality and life. They are like the undead, so they've already died and they're trying to somehow continue their life like the disembodied spirits do. You have this uh, pale skinned version of them, just as we talked about descriptions. The Nephilim and the Rephaim had very pale skin, and Vlad the Impaler had very pale skin.
Hmm.
He was a Scythian. He was a Tuatha De Danann, Datanu, Tuatha Danu, and that they took their genealogies back to the Egrithi tribe of the Scythians, which was a tribe that was begat by Hercules, son of Zeus. And King Charles III says he
Yep.
takes his genealogies back through the Hanovers down to Vlad the Impaler. So he's this pale skinned Scythian, Tuatha De Danann, the fair folk, the fairy folk, the fair skin folk. Fair was thought, it comes from the word fair skin, because that in antiquity, all the giants had fair skin, and that was a sign of beauty, right? It just goes part with the culture as it comes downstream. And of course, red hair and blonde hair were their most preferred hairs, because that was the hair color of the nobility. So don't be surprised to learn that Vlad the Impaler had the ultimate color of the giants, which was red. Blonde was slightly inferior in their sort of ranking in the hierarchy, but gold blonde, that sort of strawberry blonde, was thought highly of as well. So they were looking for those kinds of mixes. He had hazel colored eyes. He had an aversion to sunlight, so he tended to walk like night.
Oh.
Um,
Just wears
and
armor all day.
yeah, so this he is sort of the imagery of a Nephilim with the understanding that dragon is the patriarchal bloodline of the giants, and fairy blood or owl blood is the matriarchal bloodline. So it sort of all sort of comes together in that. And you also have um, this understanding of this vampire that comes through this night operating witch, this Upier, which is rooted in the Indo-Aryan Rephaim Nephilim language that shows up after the flood inexplicably in Oberon as being, or Uper, and Uber as in Germany, and as
Oh
in
yeah.
Oberon as in the King of the Fairies in Shakespeare, and it stands for overlord. So an
Mm.
Oberon was part of the Tuatha De Danann and Scythian titles of a king and a warrior king that's connected to Upiers and this night operating vampire that drinks blood. I mean, the imagery and the allegories just run so deep in the Dracula story that it was written by an adept polytheist, because they create these literatures to keep their history, to keep their genealogies, and to keep their religion sort of omnipresent, even though they were living in the Christian West.
So with the blood consumption and stuff, would you consider that one kind of like a main thing when it comes to the recreating of all this stuff too? Because you kind of, whenever you hear someone mention cult or cult sort of thing, kind of the stereotype thought of is like, oh yeah, those blood sacrifices
Yep.
and all that stuff. Do you think that like specifically with the blood sacrifices and with the fascination with blood, that's kind of like one of the main traits of dealing, with just like the recreation of hybrids and all that stuff of what the secret societies are trying to do in general?
Well, there's a concept in with the Rosicrucians, the Gnostics, who created Theosophy in the New Age,
Mm-hmm.
a concept made famous, I think, by the Rosicrucians. That's called Vril, Bril, and that has
Real.
something to do with the blood,
Mm. Okay.
right? And that this was inherited by the Nazis, who took Theosophy and put their Grail and Volkish ideology on it and created something that they called Ariosophy, Arianism, because they believed their ancestors were the Aryans of Atlantis, or Thule, which is another sort of Atlantis type of mythology. And
Mm-hmm.
that if you could sort of backward engineer that there was something in the blood, that you could recreate this super race of humans.
The Uberman.
The Uberman, yeah, the Superman. And Superman, of course, comes from his father in the house of El, Durel, and Jor-El as his father and his name are,
Yep.
a messiah of the world. I mean, as I say, they put they control all of the entertainment with all of their imagery. And so this real ideology is something about the blood that's different, right? And so you get this sort of understanding that Rh negative is something that's kind of unique within the blood groups, and there's four types of Rh negative blood, and that Rh negative is very sort of dominant in the royal families and the intermarriage that they did, and it's not very conducive for Rh positive for reproducing, right?
Yeah.
Unless you take drugs, which you can do in the modern world. Um, so, but people say, well, Rh negative blood can't be what that's being talked about, because Rh negative is missing the D antigen. So you can't add something in when something is missing, right? It doesn't make sense. But of course, that's the superficial argument. That's not really the full understanding. But most people say, okay, there's nothing to that. Well, they prize Rh negative blood, and Oh is the universal blood, and you have the highest ranking in their hierarchy if you have O negative. I guess you could say that. Well, if you're human, that would be good too for, like blood is just so good it can be used with everybody. But they believe in something called a gens or a gentry.
Hmm.
And we see that as a fairy gene, as they like to call it. It's also known as the gene of Isis, as I write about in the book. It's also known as the LB gens. Again, LB means pale skin, white gens from a patriarch, a genealogy. And those genses take them back to a specific Nephilim or Rephaim and a god. And just as for the black nobility coming out of Italy, the main one, there's a few, but the main one is the Julia gens, which goes back to Romulus and Remus, who were Nephilim or Rephaim and the offspring of gods, right? So it's a common sort of understanding. And so they also put this forward as the gene of Isis, the gene of the mother goddess. Um, but as it could also be a gene of a male god as well, obviously. But the allegory tends to be the gene of Isis, as in the allegory of reproducing and stuff like that. So it's the gene, not the blood, that dictates
Hmm.
Rh negative or Rh positive. So it's that gene that reproduces the Rh negative for people of that sort of descent. Now, Rh negative is typically 15% of the worldwide population, so it's not the greatest amount. And you also have, but that makes sense because for so long you had so much difficulty in reproducing with Rh positive, right?
Hmm.
And they also intermarry a lot. So that would sort of limit it. And it's more heavily populated in France and Sweden and England, where a lot of the Western royals are rooted. The most heavily weighted Rh negative group was the Basques. And in surveys on that, you would see anywhere from 50 to 80% Rh negative in the people. Whereas in Europe, you're getting about 25%, which is higher, 25 to 30%, which is higher than the 15%. But if you zero that in on the upper nobility, that number starts to shoot through the roof. But they don't like to sort of give you that detail on the surveys. But the Basques are very interesting people because they're like an Indo-Aryan people. They come out of nowhere. They're kind of unaccounted for. And their language is unaccounted for. And
Wow.
so they have their own history. They call themselves, actually, you're going to love this in their mythos, the Homo Atlanteans. And they say that they started after the flood, the Egyptian civilization, the Mesopotamian civilization,
Hmm.
and the Scythian civilization, and then decided to settle in northern Spain and southern part of France as the Basque people.
Mm.
Now, if you look at what happened to the Basque people, there was a diaspora, there was a persecution of the Basques. They had to flee around the world. And what they say, or at least some of the people, some of the Basques that I've talked to, what was really going on, and comes down from generation to generation as this being the reason, is that as bloodlines moved out from the Rephaim out of the Middle East and into Europe to form the kingships, there was I guess, what you would call a kind of a bit of a standoff between what the Basque considered inferior junior bloodlines to their senior bloodline
Of course.
and created a rivalry. So they pushed them out. But that's not unusual for the Western Europeans to do that. So they did something through their secret societies, through the Masonic lodges and the Royal Masonic secret societies. They created something called social masonry.
Mm.
And it started at the time about theosophy, and they started to educate people like Lenin and Trotsky. And then they launched that onto the Scythian bloodline of the Tsars of Kiev, the Putyanin bloodline, the Romanovs are a junior offshoot of the Putyanin, because there was a falling out, and we think there was a purity argument, and that the Russian line was not going to cooperate with what the Western Europeans wanted. So at the first opportunity, they launched communism that took the Romanov bloodline right out. And then they had to create National Socialism because communism got out of control. And between World War I and World War II, the Kaiser bloodline is gone. And then it sort of takes down the Habsburg bloodline out of Austria. And then they're not done there. What do? They launch communism into China. And it takes the Shah bloodline down.
Jeez.
And now we have two bloodline people who say they take their bloodlines back to the Putyanin bloodline with Putin and Kiev, which is why Kiev is so important, and Xi, which comes from the Western bloodline of the Shah dynasty that goes back to the dragon kings and the dragon creator gods. And they're all reestablishing their empire. So, I'm not sure how I got that far down on the line on that rant, but
oh, you're good. You are totally fine. Yeah, we're coming up to almost the allotted 2 hours. We got 15 minutes left. We'll go ahead and we'll, if anybody has any questions for Gary,
Sure.
we'll go ahead and kind of make that a Q&A if people have anything. Because I know I still have some questions. I thought there was one way in the beginning. Let me see if I can find it here. Chaos Smash says bald. That is towards me. Very, very hurtful. I'm balding. Yes, probably something that the redheaded Nephilim did not have to worry about. Unfortunately, I was not.
Nephilim were hairy, very
hairy. True.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, here we go. Brian Tucker, way back at the beginning of the show, says, question for Gary. When the restrainer is removed, will 90% of demons be unleashed? I don't know if...
Yeah, I think they'll all be released once the restrainer is removed. And there's two views on who the restrainer is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's more, but the main two are either the Holy Spirit or Michael. I think by the midpoint of the last 7 years, both the Holy Spirit's gone, and Michael has been removed. Michael fights against the empires, but not from rising, but from them having the ability to succeed in presenting the true Antichrist. So he's been fighting that all the way through, just as the Antichrist spirit has been with us throughout. And so if you look at the timing of the opening of the abyss, that's 6 months to a year and a half before the midpoint of the last 7 years. So they're all released actually before either restrainer, Holy Spirit, or Michael sits down until Antichrist comes back to power. And of course, then you've got the war in heaven, right? Same immediately thereafter. So yeah, they will all be amongst us, including all of the abyss angels by the midpoint of the last 7 years.
Yeah, those abyss angels, that's not good.
No.
That is not good at all. Let me check over at the other spots, see if there's any other questions at the moment. I know one thing that we kind of wanted to ask as well is kind of where like Bigfoot or the Sasquatch areas kind of fit in. It sounded like it would fit underneath the fairy sort of, maybe? Bigfoot?
Similar type of creation. So, I mean, I look at the fairies as like a Nephilim kind of creation.
Okay.
And I think there's different kinds of creations that the fallen angels did. So they, like created a chimera, right? That is kind of unique. And King Hababa of the Cedar Forest is a chimera type of Nephilim, probably. And then also you get this sort of interesting description in the Epic of Gilgamesh where he and Upnautishan and all the giants on the ark of the giant ark story are 2/3 God and 1/3 human, not demi as in sort of 50-50. And so it makes you wonder whether or not there's different parts that they were able to sort of intermix, or there's maybe that might refer to a different animal, or I don't know. It's something, it's unusual, 2/3 God, 1/3 human. Maybe they just were bolstering their own image as being a more powerful demigod. But it's interesting. But you also get centaurs that are created in a cloud, right? And that's a cross chimera type of thing too, right? So you get that sort of imagery. And I would put sort of Bigfoot in that similar kind of category. So, and what we know about Bigfoot is that they're a large being, but not as large as the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
So something somewhat distinct. They're very hairy, like Nephilim, just as Horim means cave dweller and hairy. So and so they also have glowing eyes, similar to what little people do for the most part, whether they're dark glowing or
Oh,
a lighter
jeez.
color glowing. And so do the Bigfoot. And their glowing eyes can be red, white, or yellow. So have different colors of glowing eyes. And they're intelligent, seemingly, because the information we have is they kind of communicate, whether it's through tapping or
Mm-hmm.
sounds. There's some sort of communication. They live in caves, like some of the Nephilim did, and underground cities and things like that. And just as little people are associated with caves, and portals are associated with caves, and the most classic one would be the gateway to Hades in the cave at the Rock of the Gods at Mount Hermon. So they also have this sulfur kind of smell, which is associated with the
Oh,
Nephilim and Rephaim as well. And there's connections around them with UFOs. So little people, UFOs, all sorts of these
yeah.
connections, right? So they could be created as a Nephilim kind of creature. So, in some other religions and sources, we get possibilities of a god that they might be sort of created from. So you'll have in like the book of Yasher, and I don't rely on the book of Yasher. I think it's been highly corrupted. But what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting is they have, elephant people that people would take back to the Ganesh god of the Hindu pantheon, but also an ape-like god. Now that sort of catches my attention when we're talking about Bigfoot. And you also
Yeah.
have monkey type of
Mm-hmm.
gods as well in the East. Um, like Hanuman of India is another one. And so you have these gods that are in the East, where more of these animal kind of creatures, as you said, were created that were kind of Nephilim like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you get um, a possibility that that's the same sort of thing. And in China, you have an ape god that's named Sun Wu King and creates the Monkey King dynasty from that, similar
Mm-hmm.
to the um, Anubis Sinoopolis on this, of the dog people. So I think that you've got a connection there that leaves open that sort of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever's going on with them, and another thing that I find really interesting about the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch is that it's a worldwide phenomena. Like little
Yeah.
people are is on all continents, like pyramids are, like giants are, like the flood story. It's a worldwide legacy, both before and after the flood. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me sort of lends to that, like, what are the odds of that happening if it's not true? How does
Mm-hmm.
everybody have the same mass hysteria or mass imagination of making these things up when they're not even talking to each other? It makes no sense, other than it was likely true and it was recorded in their
Mm-hmm.
oral history.
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel I watched called How to Hunt, and he would talk about hunting and stuff, but other times he would talk about Sasquatch, and people would send in Sasquatch stories and
Yep.
whatnot. And he was talking about one guy who had a land to where he noticed like a lot of his like sheep or whatever he was herding would just get
Yep.
obliterated and taken.
Yeah.
And he kind of at one point didn't see him, but were like he knew that he was surrounded by like Sasquatch and stuff, and he kind of made a deal with him. It's like, look, like stop, like you're not allowed to eat my stuff, but like when we go hunting and stuff like that, we discard, the guts and stuff. You can have that, like kind of as a
Yep.
peace offering, but yet, and it was fine for a while, but then they started doing it again where it was
Yeah.
like he had to he's like, no, we had a deal because they got greedy, and it was like, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there's another question here by Chris D, who asks, "Is there a trigger event that removes the restrainer? If so, what might it be?"
Well, I think it's just part of that whole end time chronology of events that comes. So I think if you're looking at a trigger event, it's when it's permitted that the seals are going to be open. You have the 10
Mm-hmm.
king empire and the universal religion in place,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is both that make the way for Antichrist. So Antichrist is the one that's going to negotiate that 7-year covenant in Daniel 9:27, and it's going to take the universal religion to bring it together under a universal religion, and those 10 kings will answer to Babylon. Babylon will be
Mm-hmm.
supporting their rising star through the first 3.5 years, and you can get the details of his rise in Daniel 11 from, let's say, about verse 19 or 20 to about 28 to the time of the abomination. And he rises up amongst the 10 kings as another horn, and they give
Mm-hmm.
him his power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So I think that is coming, and when that's all in place, and it's the ordained time with all of that in place as you get towards the middle, and the abyss has been opened, the seals have come, the trumpets have come. That's the point that is said it's now when all the mystery of God is going to be
Yeah.
fulfilled that Revelation talks about. That's when the
Mm.
restrainer is removed.
Yep, absolutely. And I would recommend. I mean, Gary's mentioned it. I mentioned it to him in the beginning, but like Great Planet Earth, can kind of give you some insights on that one if you wanted to kind of see how prophecy in the Bible is slowly coming to coming to true. And of course, like other stuff, like what Gary just said too, the abomination that takes desolation. That's a big key factor.
Yep.
And even just if there's some sort of leader that initiates to the world that hey, you can start sacrificing animals again, there's a big one. There's a big one too.
Well, yeah, and we want to be careful not to get ahead of end time chronology, right?
Yep.
And so you have the beginning of sorrows that are the same catastrophes that show up in the seal judgments, the trumpet
Hmm.
judgments, and the wrath bowls. It's just different degrees. So we're going to see a lot of disasters like that. Plus, we're going to see multiple antichrists, as Jesus warns us about, and the epistles of John talks about. So you're going to have an ultimate antichrist wannabe
Yep.
that Antichrist can use to say, I defeated the Antichrist. And you're going to have a war like that, which I think is the Revelation 9 war right after the abyss is open, Joel 1 and 2, because it's the same creatures in both. And then Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is the Gog war. So, and Gog, as you take that back to Greek and
Russia.
Hebrew, is an end time Antichrist figure, as well as being a giant's name that doesn't show up in the table of nations. Magog does, but Gog does not. Magog, Gog is of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech. Meshech is the root word for Moscow as it
Yep.
comes down.
Yep.
And Gog is the giant created by Iapetus, a parent god before the flood, as was Magog and Albion, which is the root word for the Albigens.
Let's see. See if there's any more questions. We're winding down here. We got roughly 2 minutes left. I guess we'll go ahead and I will ask one final question. And this is something I'm kind of curious on your personal belief, Gary. If we look at Job and
Mhm.
all of the principalities coming in and God's checking with everyone and Satan's among them. He's like,
Yep.
where have you gone
Yep.
to and fro,
Yep.
sort of stuff. With all of this hybrids and intermingling and stuff like that, are you one to believe that a lot of people take the Job story as a fact of God gives permission to Satan to do all the stuff in Job, so therefore God allows permission of one could say bad stuff happening and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Do you think that that's kind of what with all this hybrid and stuff that obviously God allowed this sort of stuff to happen? to
God allows everything to happen through free choice.
Mm-hmm.
And he's
Okay.
greater than free choice because he's the Alpha Omega.
Yep.
And he'll resolve everything through free choice. So, yes, Satan, I think, did a plea bargain to be degraded as an accuser and a sifter throughout the ages for a time, and not sent to the abyss like the rest of the fallen angels. He will at the end of the last 7 years, and that he fallen angels that aren't in the abyss and the demons, they're just sifting humankind. And it's similar through all the generations. And so everybody's on sort of the same sort of level playing field to make their choice. And they will take pleasure in deceiving as many people as possible, because it takes very strong faith to follow God
Yep.
and not to cave into peer pressure and what goes on in this world. So yeah, he's permitted to do certain things. There are rules of engagement to a certain
Yep.
degree. I mean, I don't know what all of those rules are, but they can't just do anything. Otherwise, some of them wouldn't be in the abyss.
Yep. I'll be nice, Anne, and just we'll go ahead, and this will be the last question. Do you think at some point, Gary, the Temple Mount will be destroyed and Antichrist will negotiate a multi-faith rebuild to include a Jewish temple?
And not enough time. I mean, once he signs the covenant, there's only 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then he doesn't even come to power until the midpoint, and he crowns himself in the temple at that time. So there's going to be a temple that's already in place. He permits the sacrifice in the covenant in the first 3.5 years, stops it at the midpoint when he becomes the revealed Antichrist, when he's crowned in the temple, as 2 Thessalonians talks about. And so the sacrifice is going to be done on a wing of a temple, as you sort of look at the language and take that back to Hebrew, or is it also translated in other English Bibles, an overspreading of the temple or an extension of the temple. So it's going to be maybe an add-on for that sacrifice, but whatever is in place as we enter in the last 7 years will be done before Antichrist has any capability of doing it. Then he's got to do his rise, and there's this great war. There's all of these catastrophes. No, I don't think that makes sense that he'll build a different one. And if you also look at Josephus's in the book of Josephus, he has a description as to the location of the Herodian temple, of the second temple, and that seems to be in a slightly different location and closer to the valley than what the Islamic mosque is built on. So you can imagine maybe something built on the wing of that, and I think the Jewish people may have kept that exact location somehow, some way to build that, or he's going to provide additional knowledge, which again he will be provided for them to build that wing, that
Mm-hmm.
extension, that overspreading to begin the sacrifices again. So no, I just don't think there's enough time to do that, unless he has huge powers to just make it happen, like through almost like magic or angelic powers or whatever. That's a possibility.
What a wonderful way to end a show, just talking about the Antichrist building up his wing and all that stuff. But we are past the 2 hour mark. Gary, thank you once again for coming on the show. Super, super excited as always to just hear you talk and just talk about a bunch of stuff. And of course, I always like to let the guest plug in whatever it is they are working on or have, and we will wrap up the show afterwards.
Sure. Obviously, I'm working on the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, and the subtitle is going to be How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Time Chronology. So I'm going to go deep into all the different kinds of giants that were recorded in the Bible, the hybrids that were created. I'll go through the angelic hierarchy. I'll go through really important words and dual prophecies to understand end time prophecy. I'll lay out my approach that I do in the preface so that people understand how I go about my research. And then I'll link it in and start providing end time chronology and linking in that information in the last part of the book. I'll be speaking on Revelation in Atlanta on the weekend of the May 26th. I'll be speaking on Revelation chronology and very interesting, juicy sort of things for explanation on some of the things that happen in Revelation, 2 different 50 minutes presentations that I'll make, and that's in Atlanta with the Sacred Word people. So just Google Sacred Word Atlanta Convention, and if you're interested in going, and I'll be there, and I'll have a table set up. I'll be out in the open, except when I'm up talking, and I'll be selling books, signing books. I'll be answering questions, and just hoping to see people and meet people.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. Thank you again, Gary, for stopping by. If you guys like and subscribe. Check out Gary. All of his information is in the description below. Smash the like button, punch the plus up button, and all that fun stuff. And of course, it is Easter, so take the time to just reflect on everything. And of course, God's gift of salvation is always extended out to you. If you haven't really know who Jesus is, he's always willing to share himself with you. And of course, after all of this discussion, I like to quote Chuck's famous verse that he says, Acts 17:11, which pretty much says, make sure to check the scripture, see if everything adds up. Don't just take our words for it. Do your research, because both Gary and I do agree the Bible does not contradict itself. If there's a question and if there's something that you truly don't understand, that's God's way of telling you to, hey, check me out further. I want to share something with you.
Be a Berarian.
Yep.
Or be a contrarian, as I like to call it. Verify.
Yeah, you have slowly converted me into declaring that's who I am. I think I said I'm a Christian contrarian Berarian sort of thing. I'll question the establishments, and if they're really following the scripture, and then I will do my research to check the scripture. But yeah, I don't want to keep you anymore, Gary. So thanks again, you guys, for stopping by. You guys have a good rest of your night. Happy Easter. God bless, and take care. See you guys.